Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and thanks so much for tuning in for another episode of Posing with Peter. In today's episode, we'll be learning how to pose the Mad Titan himself, Thanos from Avengers Infinity War. Now we've got 6 different poses and a lot to cover in this video, so before we begin, I just want to go over a few quick reminders. So at the beginning of each episode, I'll be highlighting the various poses that we'll be covering like how you're seeing now. Additionally, if I'm working on a pose that you're really not into, that's okay. I'll be providing the timestamps for each pose in the description box below. Also, it's important to know that I'm not sponsored by Hot Toys or Sideshow. The figures that I'll be using are from my own personal collection, so while I do hope to inspire you to pose your figures as well, please remember that these are very delicate figures, so be careful and proceed with caution. With that being said, let's get on with the show. Alright, so here we have Thanos looking pretty much straight out of the box, and so we'll just go over a quick checklist of the items that we'll be using throughout this video. Now, the first item here is the huge but gorgeous base that's included, which helps because he's a pretty massive figure, so it's nice that he comes with a wide enough base to support his weight. Now there's also this clear pole with an adjustable crotch grabber, and this is going to be absolutely crucial when we pose him with Loki later on. Now we've got this angry mean face head sculpt, and god, that's such incredible work by Young Kim at Hot Toys. Absolutely nailed it. Then we've got an open right palm, which I think I used in all of my poses, so while he does come with a closed fist and relaxed right palm, I personally didn't use them for these poses, but hey, feel free to do so accordingly. And lastly, we've got this sculpted left arm that's in a fixed, bent position. Now, this is one of the coolest things that's included in this figure in my opinion. Hot Toys really didn't have to create a completely separate mold just for a bent arm, but they did anyways to prevent damaging the rubberized extended arm, so that's awesome. Additionally, the gauntlet can rotate at the forearm, and the gauntlet hands are interchangeable, which we'll cover momentarily. And so that pretty much sums up the items we'll be using, so let's get on with the posing. Alright, so this first pose is a pretty neutral one. Similar to my Neo tutorial, I figured we can start off nice and easy, just to get accustomed to the ins and outs of the figure before we fully dive in. Also, this may feel a bit slow paced at first since I'll be going over the fundamentals and things to look out for, but not to worry, we'll be ramping up the pace with faster edits as we dive deeper into the video. And so the first thing I want to do here is demonstrate how to switch out the arms by holding the figure close to the chest. Now personally, this is my preferred method to avoid dropping the figure, but feel free to do whatever works best for you. And so to remove the left arm, we'll first want to extend it upwards as far as it goes. Then, while holding the figure in place with one hand, we'll want to pull the arm straight out of the socket using the other hand. Once that's done, we'll want to remove the articulated gauntlet since we'll be placing it on the sculpted bent arm. And so we'll just want to gently pull them apart, and then we'll do the same with the fisted gauntlet as well. And to reattach the gauntlet hands, just carefully slot them into the wrist peg and push firmly until it clicks into place. Now a quick tip. Whenever posing the hands, we'll want to make sure the top side of the hands are appropriately aligned with the forearm, otherwise it won't look natural. And now that we have the bent arm ready to go, we can simply reattach it to the body by inserting the peg back into the arm socket. Nice work, pal. And so we're going to want to bring him in a little bit closer, and we'll want to switch out the right closed fist with the open hand instead. And to do that, we'll just firmly hold the arm in place while gently pulling the fist towards us. I find that wiggling it around helps. Now we'll just go ahead and pop that open hand back onto the wrist peg, and once we've got that in place, we can start fine-tuning his body language. Now a quick tip here, when adjusting his head, we'll want to be careful not to scrape the head sculpt on the collar. We'll go over that part in detail with the more aggressive poses later on. Now when rotating his arms, be sure to have enough distance between the body and the armpit area. We don't want to rub the paint from the arm onto the body or vice versa. Now we'll carefully rotate his arm up so the gauntlet is about eye level first, and then we can pivot the elbow in closer to his body. And so now we can just fine tune his fingers. Now the look that I went with was from the very first reveal trailer that showed him with the gauntlet. He said this awesome line that wasn't even in the movie. It was something like, "Fun isn't something one considers when balancing the universe, but this does put a smile on my face." Ugh. That line is both chilling and unforgettable, and is actually what inspired this pose. And so my recommendation is to go back and actually re-watch that trailer, and then pause it right around 1 minute 49 seconds, and you'll see the pose that we're going for here. Now once we've got that left arm dialed in, we can raise the right arm up and then rotate it backwards just a bit to imply a more commanding presence. And a friendly reminder, we'll want to properly align the top side of his hand with the forearm, otherwise it won't look natural. Now when it comes to his rubberized arms, we'll want to be careful not to fully bend them inwards, otherwise it'll bunch up and will definitely cause permanent damage. Now it's important to know that there are about 5 positions that the arm can click into place, but for this pose I only went with just 1 click. And to be on the safe side, I wouldn't recommend going any further than 2 clicks for any pose. Alright, so now that we're done with the upper body, we can start working on his legs. Now what's cool is that the legs can twist within the pants, and we can use that to our advantage. So what we'll want to do is pull that left leg out while also twisting it at the same time. Then we can bend the ankle down a bit, but not to the point where the ball joint is exposed, just enough to flatten his boot onto the table. Doing so both widens his stance for a more menacing pose while also granting the figure a better balancing point. Now we can pull that left leg out just a little bit more while pushing his chest back to exude more confidence. Slightly rotate the arm back just a bit, and boom! There's our pose from the first reveal trailer. Alright, so this next pose is a bit more technical since we're introducing an additional figure, that being Loki, Odin's son, Prince of Asgard. Now since we already went over the fundamentals in the first pose, the editing is going to get a little bit faster going forward. Alright, so we've reset Thanos back to a standard pose, and for this one the items we'll be using are his right open palm and the bent gauntlet arm. We'll also be using our guest figure, the god of mischief himself, Loki. Now, if you haven't already done so, the hands you'll want to attach to Loki are his left, knife-wielding hand, along with his right, open palm, which is normally used to hold the Tesseract. Now, since Thanos uses the gauntlet to stop Loki's attack, we'll want to switch out the extended gauntlet arm for the bent gauntlet arm. Also, be sure to attach the closed fisted gauntlet. Now that we've got the right items attached, we can carefully rotate the gauntlet so the Infinity Stones are face down. Then we can rotate his arm up while avoiding any paint rub in the process. Also, we'll want to pull the gauntlet inward to simulate him using the Space Stone. So now we'll want to tilt his head forward since he does look down on Loki in the scene. And since the upper body is not articulated, we'll need to use his legs and pelvis to emulate a menacing lean. Now since he twists Loki's arm into submission, we'll want to raise his right arm and rotate the palm so it's facing upwards. And just like our last pose, we'll only want to bend the straight arm inwards just 1 click to avoid any permanent damage. Now since we previously bent his upper body down, we'll want to balance his lower body by bringing both his legs back. And if he isn't standing on his own, then we'll want to keep making minor adjustments to the legs until we find his center of balance. Now what's cool is that hidden just below his beefy chest is a ratcheted abdominal joint, and we can use that by firmly pressing against his stomach with one hand while pulling his chest down with the other. Doing so will lock him into place and allow him to really tower over Loki. Alright, and once he can stand on his own, it's time to bring in the victim. Now when posing Loki, the first thing we'll want to do is raise his left arm up since Thanos will be grabbing it. And the trick to these figures that wear form-fitting outfits like Loki, Deadpool, Batman, or Spidey, honestly is patience. With enough patience, you can carefully manipulate the figure's arm beneath the fabric in such a way that grants us a pose that doesn't cause damage to the suit. It just takes a lot of rotating the arm underneath while pulling the fabric back into a position that's not as stressful on the suit. And so once we've conquered that challenge, it's time to bring Loki in for his close-up. So we'll want to place Loki's left forearm into Thanos' right open hand. And once they're able to balance on their own, we can fine-tune Loki's posture to emulate his agonizing defeat. So first we'll bend his right arm up at the elbow and then slightly rotate his open palm upwards. Once that's dialed in, we'll want to tilt his head back, but be mindful of his sculpted hair. It is sharp and can poke holes in his cape if you're not careful. And now that the upper body language is done, we'll want to widen his legs about shoulder length apart while bending his knees to solidify his submission. And that's pretty much it for this pose. He should have used his words more carefully. Actually, he shouldn't have even taken the Tesseract from Odin's vault to begin with, but no, he had to be all greedy, and even Thor was like, "You really are the worst, brother." Alright, so this next pose also features Loki, but this one requires a bit of a balancing act and a lot of patience, so let's jump right in. Now since both figures were just used in the last pose, I didn't bother resetting them back to standard in order to avoid redundancy. Now the items we will be using are the extended gauntlet arm, the articulated gauntlet hand, and the huge display base to prop Loki up. And as previously mentioned, we'll only want to bend the extended arm just 1 click to avoid any damage. We can see that it bunches up if we go any further. Now once we attach the arm back to the body, we can then rotate his arm up while keeping a safe distance under the armpit to avoid any paint rub, and then bring the elbow in. And now we can turn his head left since he'll be looking directly at Loki, and so to safely avoid scraping the collar, we can tilt the chin forward and then carefully slide the head sculpt over the collar. Now we'll want to lower his right arm down to his side since he lifted Loki pretty effortlessly in this scene. And once we've got Thanos in place, we can move back over to Loki. Look at him, standing there all dramatic. It's like Tony said in Avengers. Full-blown diva. Anyways, we can remove the knife since Thanos squeezed it out of his hand at this point. And, like last time, we can carefully raise his arm while patiently adjusting the fabric to avoid putting stress on the suit. And so now that the upper body is done, we can move down to his legs. Now when bending his knees, we'll want to be careful to flatten the fabric behind the knee first in order to avoid permanent creasing. And since Thanos will be lifting him up, we'll want to point his boots down and extend the left leg more than the right to simulate his struggle. Alright, now that we've got both poses down, it's time to bring in the base. And this is where our true test of patience comes into play because this part takes a lot of micro adjustments. So as you can see, once I put both figures on the base, there was just too great of a height distance for my liking. Not only was Loki too low, Loki was low key. God, why am I like this? It also made Thanos look like he was holding him by his face, and we don't want that. And so what we'll want to do is remove the pole from the base and then slide the crotch grabber almost to the top before reattaching it to the base. Now that Loki is about eye level with Thanos, we can make our final adjustments like balancing him on the pole, wrapping the gauntlet around his neck, and placing Loki's arms around it as he draws his last breath. And there it is, Loki's demise. Alright, now we're getting into more aggressive poses, and in this one, Thanos goes face to face with the master of the mystic arts, Doctor Strange. Now just a heads up, the pose you're seeing here is a bit more dynamic than what we're about to go over because when I finished recording the tutorial, they actually couldn't fit on the turntable since they were too far apart. And so I kind of had to improvise, adapt, and overcome in order to get this rotating shot. Alright, so here we've got Doctor Strange from Infinity War, and my god, what an incredible looking figure. I mean, look at that tunic, and his colors, and the head sculpt. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked. Now, since this is a Thanos posing tutorial, we're just going to quickly speed through setting up Doctor Strange. Now, to attach the mystic sword to his left hand, just gently pull the fingers open and carefully slide it in before reattaching the hand to his arm. We can also add some of the orange rings to his forearm to affirm his use of magic. And for his right arm, we'll want to use his open palm for this pose. Now, when positioning his arms, we'll want to raise them up since he's striking Thanos with the sword. And because it's a mid-action stance, we'll want to spread his legs pretty far apart as well. And once we throw on his magnetic cape, we can set him aside for the time being. Now looking back at Thanos, we'll want to swap out the extended gauntlet arm for the bent gauntlet arm along with the articulated gauntlet hand. And once we've done that, we can fine-tune his fingers to be bent down just a bit. Now once we slot that arm back into his body, we'll want to rotate the gauntlet to about a 45-degree angle. And once we've got that down, we can finally swap out the normal head sculpt for his super mean face. You know, his head really does look like a grape when it's not attached to his body. Just saying. So back to posing. Since he'll be looking at Doctor Strange, we'll want to turn his head to the right and raise his gauntlet arm up. And to avoid any paint rub, we'll want to pull his right arm out and up first and then bend it in just one click. Once that's done, we can tilt the hand up for when he grabs the sword. Now moving on to his lower body, this is where we start to get real aggressive. Now because he's got a super wide stance, we'll want to take advantage of his double jointed knee and bend it about 45 degrees. Then at the pelvis, we'll want to bend the right leg up until it clicks into place. And once we've got him on the table, we can widen his stance even more by pulling the legs further apart, but remember to be careful not to tear the pants. And so once again, when turning his head, we'll want to tilt his chin forward so his head sculpt can rotate over the collar to avoid any scraping. And once he's back on the table, we can bend his left knee as well to help with the balance. And that's pretty much it for Thanos, so now we can bring back Mr. Doctor. Now as you can see, I had Thanos' arm positioned too low since he actually grabs the top of the blade in the movie. So we'll just want to raise his arm even higher in order to achieve the pose we're going for. And so we'll just want to gently wrap his fingers around the blade, but be careful since the blade has jagged edges and can cause damage to the fingers. And there you have it, the Battle of Titan. Alright, now moving on to our next action pose, we have Thanos going toe-to-toe with our first Avenger, the Super Soldier, our one and only Captain America. Now I really like this scene because when Thanos arrived at Wakanda, he basically tossed everyone else aside like a rag doll, but not Cap. Out of everyone that ran towards Thanos, Cap was the last man standing and even got in a few good hits before holding Thanos back with his bare hands. And the look that Thanos gave him before pounding him into the ground spoke volumes of both his surprise and admiration that a mere mortal could possess such strength. Mad respect. And so like the last pose, we'll just speed through setting up Cap. So the hands we'll want to use are the relaxed hands for both arms. We'll also want to attach the Wakandan shield only to his left arm since he wasn't wearing the one on the right in this shot. And so like all accessories, we'll want to remove the hand from the body first, then attach the accessory to the hand, and then reattach it to the body by sliding his forearm through the loop. Now quick tip, the pointed end of the shield is a bit sharp, so be careful not to poke yourself when applying pressure to the hand. Alright, now that we've got Cap all geared up, it's time to work on his pose. Now like most Captain America hot toys, rotating the arm can be troublesome since the fabric tucks into his shoulder joint. However, it is a separate piece and can be rotated with enough pressure. So we'll just want to bend his elbow in and raise his arm up, then we'll do the same with the other arm. And there we have it. Cap looking like he's ready to catch a football. Or frisbee. Or an abnormally giant hand of an intergalactic warlord. Alright, so looking back at Thanos, we'll want to swap out his normal head sculpt for his mean face since he does put up a bit of a struggle. And then we'll also swap out the extended arm for the bent gauntlet arm along with the articulated gauntlet hand. And now we'll just want to raise his left arm up just a bit while rotating his gauntlet hand to be horizontal, followed by some micro adjustments of his elbow placement. Now with the right arm at his side, we'll actually want to raise it up and pull it back to simulate him walking towards Cap. Now this is the only time I bent the elbow in 2 clicks because it really helps bring his forward movement to life. Now moving back over to the gauntlet, we'll want to extend the fingers just a bit since Cap ends up holding onto them. Alright, now this is probably the most crucial part of this pose. We'll need to position his legs just right in order to fully simulate his forward motion, and so to do that, we'll want to bend his right knee just a bit, then twist his pelvis in, and I mean really twist, like we're crossing the left side of his chest down to his right knee. Now heads up, Thanos will not be able to stand at this point, but that's okay. The beauty of this pose is that because both figures will be leaning into each other, we can use their weight to counterbalance one another. Now at this point, we're only going to bring Cap back into the mix just to verify their hands are at matching heights. If it looks good, then we can separate them for now and start working on Cap's posture. Now we'll want to bring Cap's left leg forward, bend the knee in, and point his boot up so it'll be flat on the table. Once that's done, we'll then bring his right leg back and point the right boot out as well. Now we can place him back on the table and fine-tune the details like widen his legs, tilt his chest back, wrap his hands around the gauntlet, and voila! Cap's last stand. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. The moment that changed the MCU forever. The ending that shocked audiences around the world. The Empire Strikes Back of this generation. The part where the bad guy wins. The snap. Now before we continue, there are a few important things I want to mention about this pose. The first is that in the movie, Thanos is only down on one knee, and although the figure can also pose on one knee, the problem is that he's way too tall when in that position due to the figure's limitation. Basically, Thor's head lined up with Thanos' stomach when I tried it, so again, I had to improvise, adapt, and overcome for their line of sight to match up. Now secondly, but more importantly, I do not recommend putting Thanos in this pose, at least not long term, and the reason is because the weight of the entire figure is placed on his soft knee pads which will bend permanently if left unchecked. So because this pose was more of a fun little challenge, I can only suggest that you do so at your own discretion. Alright, so for this pose we'll be using Thanos along with our favorite pirate angel, Thor from Infinity War. And again, this figure is just incredible. I mean, look at the detail in his face. They even painted the fake eye yellow and added the scar that he got from Hela. Hot toys, man. So the items we'll want to use for Thor are his chainmail arms, both left and right open palms, and of course, Stormbreaker. And for Thanos, the items we'll be using are his mean face, the bent gauntlet arm, and articulated gauntlet hand to simulate the snap. Now once we've got those items attached, we can begin posing Thanos by raising his bent arm up, then rotate the entire gauntlet to face forward. Then we can fine-tune the fingers to emulate the snap. Now unfortunately, due to the gauntlet's limitations, we can't get the thumb and middle fingers to actually connect, so the best thing we can do is bring them as close together as possible while closing his pinky and ring fingers to prepare for the snap. Now moving on to the legs, we'll really want to take advantage of those double jointed knees and bend them as much as the figure will allow. Now a quick tip here, the pants will be pulled down, so we'll just want to tuck them back into his shirt. Once that's done, we'll want to flatten out his boots so the figure doesn't fall forward when placed on the table. And as a friendly reminder, the soft knee pads will sustain damage if left in this position for too long. And that's pretty much it for Thanos. So to avoid damaging those knee pads, we'll want to place him on his back while we work on Thor. Now since Thor will be wrapping his left arm around Thanos' head, we'll want to raise it up about eye level first, and then we'll rotate the palm so that it's vertical and inward. We'll also want to remember to align his gauntlets properly and tilt his head up and to the left if you have them looking at each other. And once that's done, we can bend his right elbow in since he'll be using that to push Stormbreaker into Thanos' chest. Now just a heads up, leaving his chainmail arm aggressively bent like this will likely cause permanent creasing, so again, please proceed with caution. And once we've got his upper body locked in, we can move on to his legs. Now since Thor leans into the push, we'll want to pull his left leg forward, then bend that knee in pretty deep while also pushing his right leg back. Also, remember to point his boots up and out in order to support his wide stance. And once we've got Thor's pose dialed in, it's time to bring them face to face. So now we can fine tune the little details like bringing Thor's left arm in, lowering the right arm if needed, and lastly, balancing Stormbreaker. This part also requires a lot of patience and micro adjustments. We'll need to balance the flat side of Stormbreaker onto Thor's thumb while pushing the rounded sharp side against Thanos' chest. And I promise you, it will drop at least once or twice. Also, when posing their heads, you can either have them looking at each other or at the gauntlet. But through vigilance and some trial and error, destiny still arrives. And that pretty much sums up how to pull off 6 action poses with your Thanos figure from Hot Toys. I really hope these tips help inspire fellow collectors to enjoy their figures to the fullest. And once again, if you made it this far into the video, then I really can't thank you enough for granting me your time. As you can probably tell, I had a lot of fun making this video, and so I hope you had just as much fun watching it. If so, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Also, be sure to subscribe so you can be notified when we drop new content here on this channel. If you're on Instagram, you can follow me at posingwithpeter16. And lastly, if you're on Facebook and want to say hi, then come join us over at 6 Scale Network. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.